Thanks for joining us for another Libertarian Christian Roundtable, where we discuss the latest news and events going on around the world. And because this is we have an upcoming election that's like the most important election in our lifetimes. Really, I mean, this time it's really true.
This time, for sure.
We have to have Mike Mohler on. He literally wrote the owner's manual to the Constitution. And so he's joining us to talk about Supreme Court vacancy that is now left by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and because Carrie is now demonstrating the attire of the future justices of the Supreme Court, she's with us.
Right.
And of course we have Matthew Bellis, who is making sure that the Supreme Court keeps the Governor Wolf in check, or something like that, or maybe that's what he's hoping
supposedly.
Yeah, supposedly. That's how it all works. So the latest news is, of course, has to be COVID related. So Matt, I'm going to let you share with us the most recent COVID related news.
There's a devastating epidemic, Doug, and I'm not talking about COVID in itself. I'm talking, as you all may know, super pigs. North America faced with a time bomb of millions of super pigs. Do these super pigs have superpowers?
Time bomb.
Yes and no. No, because
Pigs.
It's not like they can fly or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it is just their vast sheer numbers. I mean, look at the tracts of land by which these super pigs take over. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Why are they called super then?
Look at their faces. How could you not look at them and
so
say
cute.
That's not super?
All I see is bacon.
I was gonna say, what happens when the
Those
time bomb goes
I don't
off?
see
Do
what
they
the problem
explode?
is here.
Yeah.
I was gonna say those animals convert vegetables to bacon. I mean, what else do we?
Right. This will handle our food shortage from COVID. What are we
This may
afraid
be
of?
Well,
the best-
Mr. Mayor told the Daily Beast it's a scary situation, and everything
Crazy.
that's happened is in what I call the pig bomb.
The pig bomb. Pig bomb. Bacon
may be
everywhere.
This may be the best thing of 2020.
Might be.
Don't worry.
Might be.
Don't
my
worry.
gosh.
If we
There's
get
not another
swine
animal
flu-
that can put little feet on the ground quicker than a wild pig.
Oh my gosh.
If we get a swine flu to help knock out all the pigs, that'll
This
make our
is
lives
not Babylon B.
better. No.
Oh my gosh.
This is from the actual, like, this is from a reputable news source. Where was it? Some British paper.
That's hilarious.
Because Britain always says North America whenever they're trying to say the U.S. 'cause Canada is really just a suburb of America. So
Right.
anyway,
Okay.
so that's
the
that.
COVID news of the day.
Well, the other COVID news of the day is, people singing in public, getting arrested, people who went to go see their kids play football games, getting tased because they're not wearing masks. Those are minor inconveniences to the real crisis.
Mm.
Big bomb.
Pig bomb.
The pig bomb with little
Pig
feet.
bomb.
And that's it for my segment. Thanks, Doug.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate that because the rest of this is going to be super serious. Because we never keep it.
No,
We're never humorous on this show.
I'm wearing gray because I
Ever.
mourn.
Because you
Yeah.
mourn. You're also blocking our logo. Thank you. So, yeah, there we go. Good work. All right. So, Carrie, please tell us. So we have Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and what's interesting to me, somebody pointed out to us on Facebook, was that all of the headlines are saying that it's Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat that needs to be filled. It's like, maybe not quite her seat. I don't think she
I think
engraved.
they took the nameplate off. Is all I'm
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's gone
Yeah.
now. I understand it's shorthand. I understand that a headline article is shorter because of it, etc. It's not her seat. So I don't know who it belongs to. I don't know what the best way, Mike, you can probably analyze like what's the best way to describe the vacancy seat and so forth. But let's talk about the career contributions, Carrie, with respect to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because it sounds like if you really assess her from as unbiased a position as you can, and you're not just like, oh, she was appointed by that evil man, Bill Clinton, then, she's not exactly the most evil person in the world.
Yeah, well, all the headlines on both sides, quite frankly, are trying to talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's contribution to the abortion question.
Mm-hmm.
And
Contributed.
yes, But that's not the only thing she did. I mean, in her career, before she got to the Supreme Court, she actually she worked for the ACLU, and she pushed for these cases that did actually go before the Supreme Court that allowed women the right to contract, which is, obviously something very important to libertarianism, which is, the ability to make agreements and things like that. Women couldn't, they couldn't take out loans. They couldn't have bank accounts in their own name. They couldn't have mortgages. They couldn't sign lease agreements without male co-signers on these things. And so, she did work towards making it possible for women to have the right to contract. And, so I think that that's worth pointing out from a libertarian perspective. Now,
what era was that? What era was that in? Like
women are rather
the
unscrupulous.
70s.
Saying.
So before the
Thank you,
70s,
Matt.
women had to have. Before the 70s, women had to have a male co-signer.
Yeah. So they had to have a
The
male co-signer on
1970s,
those
right?
things.
Yeah.
Okay. That's right.
Sure.
So, but so some of the other things that that she did was she opposed removing the legal liabilities for vaccine manufacturing companies. So lots of people still don't know this, but it's starting to become more widely understood that pharmaceutical companies are held liable for medications that they manufacture that end up causing harm.
Yeah,
but the Supreme Court ruled in favor of removing those legal liabilities so that they could just, create those vaccines without threat of lawsuit from consumers. So Ginsburg opposed that.
Wow.
And Ginsburg also opposed warrantless searches. And that's a problem.
She opposed the immunity for pharmaceutical companies?
Yeah, she opposed.
She opposed it. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Now she was in the as I understand it, she was dissenting, so she wasn't in the majority opinion.
her side didn't win.
Her side didn't win. But she also opposed warrantless searches, and she did strike down. She was part of a majority opinion that struck down drug testing for women against their knowledge and consent. So during the era of, this was right after the drug war started, when everybody was worried about crack babies, you had hospitals who were testing pregnant women without their knowledge or consent for drugs. And if they came back positive, they immediately turned those women over to the police. So at any rate, I would say, she did have some contributions and that I think were notable, at least. I don't think we need to go, praising her career and things like that. But this makes the segue into what her actual contributions were considering abortion, because that's also overplayed quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, I want to get to the abortion thing in a second, but I this might also be a good way to sort of start the rest of our conversation with asking Mike, how important is the Supreme Court? How important? Well, there's two parts to that. How important is the Supreme Court, and how important constitutionally should the Supreme Court be? And it sounds like the two are probably very different. So I don't know what sort of word. I'm sure you could go on for hours, but in a few minutes, tell us the truth.
I think a good way to kind of parse it out is to look at this, the vaccine case that Carrie mentioned. From a libertarian frame of reference, that seems like a good ruling. But the truth of the matter is, we don't know whether it's a good ruling or not. And I think the problem that we have with the Supreme Court today is that we look at it as a policy-making body. Mm-hmm. And a court was never intended to be a policy-making body. So we can't really say whether or not her opinion on that vaccine case was good or bad unless we read the statute that Congress wrote and evaluate what that statute says, because the court's job is to evaluate the statute. Mm-hmm. And, she says that in her opinion that the statute did not support liability for these companies or taking away liability for these companies. But the majority of the court felt like the statute read differently. Well, I can't say one way or the other because I haven't read the statute. But this demonstrates the problem that we have today with the court. People view it as a policy-making body. She did this policy. She did that policy. That's not the Supreme Court's job. The Supreme Court's job is to look at a case and determine that case based on the law. And the law is, number one, the Constitution. Number two, the statute is written by...
I'm sorry. Number one, the Lord. Just...
Well... Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Matthew.
I got to make things awkward. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, to answer your question more directly, the framers during the ratification debates, the argument was that the court would be the weakest of all three branches of the government. Alexander Hamilton wrote an entire essay in the Federalist talking about the fact that the court would be relatively powerless. It would be just deciding cases. And we now have a situation where the court has effectively become the lawmaking body in the United States, where it's dictating minute policy at the local level.
Why do you think that is, though?
Why do I think that is?
Yeah.
Because people like it that way.
Yeah.
People like it. They like being able to, there's this sense that if we can just control 5 judges, then we can basically have our policy imposed across the entire United States.
But is it how the Congress writes the laws that it allows for that type of interpretive power? Or is it just because as humans we have a little bit of an authority bias that we want to give power over to individuals or oligarchies? I mean, where does that where does that line up? I'm just trying to find that portion of it out.
Well, personally, I think it has to do with just the dynamics of how government has changed over the last. I mean, there's always been this jockeying for power among the Congress and the president and the courts, and then you can look at the states and local. I mean, there's always power. Anytime there's power, people with power want more power, and they want to fight over, who gets to have the most power. And it just so happens that the nature of the court has allowed it to accumulate the most power. For one thing, you can't get rid of them; they're not accountable to anybody. And for another thing, in many cases, Congress, which is supposed to be the most powerful branch of the government, Congress has usurped its responsibility because it can pass things off and say, oh, well, we can't do anything here because the court said, and they can shift responsibility. And they've shifted a lot of responsibility to the executive branch. So now we effectively have an elected king and an oligarchy of judges who effectively dictate policy for 320 million Americans. And I quite frankly think that's a really bad system of government. I think it's horrible. If you just look at the hue and cry that we have right now, we have this one vacant seat on the Supreme Court, whoever it may belong to. And everybody is like, I mean, there are people that literally, they've taken it to the hyperbole level of this is life or death. It's not a good system when an unelected, unaccountable lawyer who is really just a government employee has this much power over any group of people.
Yep. Totally agree.
Yeah. Well, so thanks, Mike. I always appreciate your thoughts on the outrage. You bring up the proper amount of outrage and analysis as to what's happening.
He's this Louis C.K. Black of no. Louis C.K. No, Louis Black of Libertarians.
Yes.
Yeah, that joke went down like an airplane. Jeez.
Matthew, I'm personally offended by that.
Don't apologize, Matthew.
Your father-in-law should be offended by that.
Was this some kind of?
Thankfully, he's not. Yeah, I'll tell you off air, Mike. All right. So, speaking of things that we should be offended by, Carrie, what is Ruth Bader Ginsburg record on abortion?
So this is the interesting thing, right? Because everybody thinks that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is somehow responsible for legal abortion. And she actually only was involved in 4 abortion cases, only one of which was a landmark case. 5 cases. The landmark case that she was involved in was Sternberg versus Carhart, otherwise known as Carhart 1. And basically what this case did was it struck down a Nevada statute that criminalized partial birth abortion. Now, she was one of two Democratic appointees. The other two justices that ruled in favor along with her were Stevens, O'Connor, and Souter. But Carhart was actually overturned later with Gonzalez versus Carhart, it's known as Carhart 2. So her major contribution, like her landmark ruling, has been already overturned, and that Carhart 2 made partial birth abortion illegal again.
I'm going to show the deck on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is an absolutely amazing table, Carrie.
It really is.
Seriously.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have Gonzalez versus Carhart, and basically what that did. So the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, which was enacted in 2003 under George W. Bush, that was passed as a response to Carhart 1. And so, of course, they expected for there to be legal challenges. And the interesting thing about this case, and I think that we'll get into this more in the next segment, but I want to point this out. The reason why the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act was upheld was not because we suddenly had pro-life justices on the Supreme Court, although you did have Thomas Scalia and Kennedy all ruling in favor of this. This was a Republican appointed majority who ruled on this. But the rationale for this was that Roe v. Wade and the other landmark case, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which upheld Roe, both of which actually banned partial birth abortion. Partial birth abortion is not legal under Roe or Casey, and Carhart 1 was significant because that was a deviation from the precedent set with Roe v. Wade and Casey. So all Carhart 2 was doing was reaffirming Roe v. Wade and the fact that partial birth abortion should not be legal under it.
Yeah, that was one of those things that we had talked about before, and it really was kind of a, darned if you do, darned if you don't type of thing, where no decision on that is really good. And so you really, unfortunately, I'm looking at the record, and really you can't hang your hat of all abortion all the time solely on Ruth Bader Ginsburg. This is kind of mind-blowing, frankly.
Yeah.
Let me just show this deck again, because Carrie, you created this, and honestly, it does a fantastic job at going through the cases by which abortion was an issue. And you'll look at this, and this is what, 24 cases?
24 cases.
3 of which were under Democrat-controlled benches. 1 was an equal outcome. And the rest are all Republican benches, which I would think a lot of people would find very fascinating to realize that a lot of the cases that decided the issue of abortion were done by
Republican
appointments.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, and actually I've got the cases sorted out according to landmark cases and what I call self-inflicted wounds, which I can explain in a minute. But basically, if you look at all of the cases from Roe v. Wade up to the Obama era, all of them were decided on by a Republican appointed majority. We have had a quote unquote conservative court for, what is that, 3 decades? 3 decades.
Yeah.
And these are cases that are not just, they're not just affirming Roe. What they are doing is, you have, hang on, let me pull up my copy here really quick. Doe versus Bolton, which was decided at the same time as Roe. It was a companion case. Doe versus Bolton, what that did was basically said that it took the definition of the woman's health and broadened it to basically anything possible. Like if a woman's emotional health could be damaged by carrying the baby.
Yeah, expansive definition of health.
Right. She could have the abortion after viability. So this is what Roe v. Wade did. Okay. Roe v. Wade said that there was a right to abort that was protected by the Due Process Clause and the 14th Amendment. Now, what the court said about Roe is that the 14th Amendment doesn't give limitations on the right to abort, obviously, because it doesn't mention the right to abort. So the Supreme Court in Roe said that it was their responsibility to set those boundaries. And this is part of the major problem with Roe v. Wade, because we like to talk about the fact that Roe v. Wade acknowledges a woman's bodily autonomy. And so it talks about a woman's liberty interest and access to abortion and things like that. But her liberty interest is subject first to state interest. And so the state may be interested in protecting the potential life of the fetus, in which case they can restrict abortion. But the state may be interested in the health of the woman, in which case they can actually create mandates about how a woman can make choices during her pregnancy, which is to take away her bodily autonomy. And this is a quote from the case. They say, "We therefore conclude that the right to abort is not unqualified and must be considered against," get this, "important state interests in regulation." So this is the thing about Roe. Roe is not about a woman's bodily autonomy. That is secondary, because her bodily autonomy is subject first to state interest.
Literally secondary to state interest.
Yes, wow. Literally.
Yeah. Wow.
And they have an interest in regulating abortion. So this is a Republican. So the justices that decided this were Blackmun, Berger, Douglas, Brennan, Stewart, Marshall, and Powell. And of those guys, only Douglas and Marshall were Democrat appointees.
Wow.
Can I make some legal points?
Yes,
please.
That I think that will be germane going forward the conversation. The first point I think is really important for people to understand, and why the proclivities of a justice that's coming on the court today doesn't matter nearly as much as people think it does, is that precedent in the mind of a Supreme Court justice is almost at the level of the Constitution itself.
Yep.
You will almost never have a court reverse a landmark precedent.
Yeah.
I can't think of any landmark precedents that have been reversed off the top of my head. Obviously, I haven't read every Supreme Court case there ever has been, but by and large, precedent is considered, and there are actually Supreme Court opinions where they elevate the jurisprudence of the court to the level of Constitution. So when people say, well, we're going to get this one judge in there and they're going to overturn Roe v. Wade, highly unlikely, because they're going to follow precedent. Yeah. And this is why I say, just in general, when people get so wrapped up in who the next Supreme Court justice, or I'm told that this is the most important election of my lifetime because this person will control who's on the Supreme Court.
Right.
A lot of these things, it's not going to change anything because the precedent has been set and they're not going to overturn it. I think that's the first.
Mike, let me ask you about the thing that you brought up here. I don't mean to step on you, Carrie, but it pains me because the thing that we keep hearing about the courts and the appointments and the voting and all this stuff, and the thing that conservative or libertarian people who are pro-life would always hear was that we need these appointments so that we could have more pro-life policies, and that if any case comes up, we can go towards a pro-life agenda. But the record shows that that's not the case.
No.
And we're looking
Not at
but and that's the thing. But people say, well, the other side, is that what you're saying? Well, no, because I know given the chance, they would further it in any way possible. Yeah. But I'm just looking at this and saying, what do we do here?
So let me point something else out to you, because you are absolutely right about this, and Mike is also absolutely correct. And I want to talk about Casey for a minute, because Casey was another landmark case.
Well, can I make one more point and then I'll shut up.
He did address Mike for the question anyway, Carrie.
Oh, my bad. I'm sorry.
No, right.
I think this is important too, because where this went off the rails was in the very first case.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember what that is, but this was even before Roe v. Wade, where they established this idea that somehow abortion was attached to this idea of due process. It's absolutely ludicrous. This whole idea of substantive due process is something that the court made up out of thin air. There is no basis for it. It was just a way that they could empower themselves to make all of these decisions, not just on abortion, but on all kinds of things. Due process, it was very clear in the constitutional language, in both the original Constitution and the 14th Amendment, that due process, all that means is that before the government can do something to you, it has to take you through the process. Mm-hmm. It's basically illegal. It's a legal idea. It's the idea that they can't throw you in jail without allowing you to have a trial. That's what due process is. Due process has nothing to do with abortion. So they've taken this idea of substantive due process, and they've used it as a tool to basically allow the court to nudge its nose into everything in the world at the state and local level that it should have never had any business in. The federal government has no constitutional authority to be involved in abortion at all, period, end of story.
Yeah.
This should have always been a state and local issue. I know people say, well, it still might have been awful. It's probably true. But I guarantee you, if it was decentralized, we would have at least some states with much more restriction on abortion than we have today.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically my spiel on the courts and abortion. They shouldn't be involved in it. Now they are. So that leads to a lot of questions of how do we move forward. But
right.
I think it is important. If nothing else, I think people should understand the original Constitution, if for no other reason, to understand just how far this government is off the rails of what was intended.
Yep.
Well, disembodied head of Carrie, what do we do?
My disembodied.
That's justice, Carrie.
More like your elbow is disembodied.
It sure is. Okay, sorry. So I want to read some notes. So I came to this revelation about Roe and Casey when I was studying Walter Block's papers in preparation for my debate with him in New York. And I want to point out something that he talks about, because he summarizes the Casey case pretty well. And so this is what he says about Casey. He says the judge's concerns, or what the court was concerned with in Casey, because there was a question about overturning Roe with Casey. But the concern was that men and women had become accustomed to the existence of legal abortion and had organized their relationships according to access to abortion. And so their concern with overturning Roe was specifically that people had become accustomed to having access to abortion.
Good grief.
They also said that a woman's participation in society was dependent upon access to abortion. And they said overturning Roe would come at a great cost for people who have adopted thinking and lifestyles on the basis of access to abortion. So basically what they said in Casey was, even if we're wrong, people are used to it. And so we have to keep going with it. And then they also said overruling Roe, which was contrary to precedent, contrary to stare decisis, would weaken the court's authority to exercise judicial power and function as the Supreme Court of the land. They said that the court's authority depends on its reputation, and that would result in a great loss of confidence and unnecessarily damage the court's reputation. So this is very interesting, especially in light of Mike's comments about how the Supreme Court was supposed to be the weakest branch of government. Their ruling with Roe isn't just about abortion. It's about their own reputation and power to continue on with the power that they currently have. So it's about every other case as well.
I mean, that argument there is compelling, but I would say the argument about people's lives continuing in the way that it has been with Roe v. Wade is very true. Let's just hope a global pandemic doesn't upend everyone's lives and we have to shut everything down. So
that wouldn't happen.
No,
That wouldn't
that's
happen.
Not
never
at all.
happened.
let's
Not
go with
again.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the other thing is it's called the Supreme Court for a reason. So, I mean,
Because
it
there's
is
sour cream on
Right,
top.
because they're
Yeah.
supreme.
because there's sour
Oh.
cream on top. Nope,
Yeah.
that's not it.
That's just Taco Bell. Everything's supreme with sour cream.
I was thinking all
It's
the
a regular
toppings.
taco, then they put sour cream in it. Now it's Taco Supreme.
You know,
What the heck?
comparing the Supreme Court to Taco Bell is a completely apropos analogy.
Yeah. Well, it in the end it has the same results. So.
All just comes out.
So-
Oh my.
So, anyways, yeah,
Mike,
the
Mike
idea
didn't know what he was getting himself into.
He didn't. So, yeah, you have these two landmark cases, which were again, and Casey was decided by an all Republican court. Like, by the way, there was a Democrat appointee who was very consistently pro-life in his record, which was Byron White. But at any rate, now those are the two landmark cases. I had mentioned the self-inflicted wound cases, and that's my term. But you have a number of cases where, well, let me back up for a minute. When you think of conservative pro-lifers and their activism and what they're trying to do, you are thinking about things like, putting restrictions on access for like teens, or allowing canvassers to go protest at clinics, and trying to establish waiting periods and things like that, trying to put these smaller barriers in the way in order to discourage a woman from getting an abortion. And so this is the other problem with all of these cases is you have a series of smaller cases, which I have listed here. I don't think I can go through all of them, but a lot of them also ruled upon by Republican appointed justices, which include, like you had Bellotti versus Baird. They said that teens don't have to secure parental consent to obtain abortion. This was Rehnquist, Brennan, Blackman, Stewart, Powell, and Berger. Those were all Republican appointees.
And it follows from the logic that they've built on this from the 1970s. I mean, the whole thing is built on, that's the way the legal system is built on blocks. You put one block on top of another. Yeah. And they're not going to knock out one of these bottom blocks. So it's going to keep going forever. Y'all want to know a dirty little secret?
Yeah.
Congress could solve this problem.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Congress has the authority to basically terminate jurisdiction on a given issue. So Congress could actually vote, pass a bill, and say abortion cases are no longer the purview of the court.
Wow.
And we'd be done with it. In fact, Ron Paul introduced such a bill on a number of occasions when he was congressman.
Wait.
Wow.
So if we just elect a majority of Republicans,
That's the answer. You found it, Doug.
yes, I
found
just
it.
figured out the solution to everything.
That
This
would
is
be the
most
second
important election.
It would be the
yeah.
second thing that they did after they got rid of Obamacare.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, there's one more case that I want to point out.
Clearly, you don't watch TV, like
Right.
you know.
There's one more case I want to point out, which was Webster versus Reproductive Health Services, where the United States Solicitor General actually advised the court to overrule Roe with this one, and they did not.
Oh my word.
Rehnquist, Kennedy, O'Connor, and Scalia. So Scalia was supposed to be the major
The
pro-life. Yeah.
Seriously.
You have to understand what Roe was about. Roe was about controlling women's bodily autonomy because it was secondary to state interest and regulating abortion.
Wow.
It was
The state owns you.
However
State owns
bad those are, I do have to say the worst of them all is City of Akron versus Akron Center for Reproductive Health. I mean, who's with me? Let's just end Akron. Hashtag
Hashtag indoctrination.
Well, like we're nuking the whole city. Is that?
Yeah,
what
we're just
doing?
done.
No, we don't need
We're
to
just
nuke it.
done
We'll
with
just,
them.
Done
we'll
with
just
Akron.
ignore it.
Goodbye,
the way
Akron, Ohio.
Where are you going to
You
get your tires?
We'll do it the way the UN ignores like Singapore, or not Singapore, but Taiwan.
Taiwan.
Taiwan, yeah,
Taiwan.
right, yeah.
Yeah. So okay, I want to play devil's advocate here and give. So we have this list. Pull this list up, right? So you have them labeled red and blue because they are Republican appointed and Democrat appointed, right?
It's more of like a pink and sky blue.
This is a proxy for, and this does definitively sort of disprove we need a Republican in office to nominate Republican appointed judge. That it does do that. However, in the interest of understanding the nuance of the nominating process, you can leave it up as however long you want. But in the interest of thinking about the nominating process, right? A president is going to nominate somebody that is going to appeal at least to some of the dissenters of the opposition party, right? And so the argument could be made that we just need a strong president who's just not going to take any BS from the other side. He's just gonna do what he thinks is right.
Right.
No.
Of the strong man.
It's a little bit of so the table doesn't tell the whole picture. It tells the picture of who was appointed by, or were they appointed by whom. But it doesn't mean that those people were right or left, right?
No.
Or right or left, or however
it
works here. But it does give us. I mean, so can't tell us everything. And so couldn't it be said that some of these people are actually pretty decent judges, even though they were actually appointed by Democrats?
Well, yeah, possibly. I mean, I've already pointed out that Byron White had the most pro-life voting record. When
he was appointed by
the Democrats.
Okay.
So, yeah, in fact, somebody had even pointed out to me on Twitter that there were a number of the court justices on the ruling of Roe who had been appointed by Republicans. They were just simply liberal in their ideas. They had they weren't genuine conservatives, and that's true. I mean, there's no reason to believe that some of these justices weren't genuine conservatives. Mm-hmm. But that's sort of the point, right? Is Republicans will nominate who they think they can get on the bench, given the current political climate. So even Trump, Trump could, let's just assume for the sake of argument that Trump is the most pro-life Republican president we've ever had. I know, snicker.
I wouldn't doubt it.
He would still have to name an appointee that would get through the process.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because
John F. Kennedy, by the way, Byron White was appointed by John F. Kennedy.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
If you're looking at things from a libertarian lens, libertarian ideas don't necessarily line up with Republicans or Democrats. So you end up with the situation as a libertarian. I look at some of these folks, and I look at a Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There were some things she was very good on. Mm-hmm. She was very good on the Fourth Amendment. Yeah. Kavanaugh, who Trump nominated, he's horrible on the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah.
Look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the things that she did in terms of contract that Carrie mentioned at the beginning. That's probably one of the few cases ever that actually properly applies the 14th Amendment and what the privileges and immunities in the 14th Amendment were meant to protect. Contract was among those. So she was very good on that. She's not good on abortion. So, it's from a libertarian standpoint, it's very difficult to look at any of these folks and say, oh, they're great or oh, they're horrible, because they're all a mixed bag, because, Democrats nor Republicans really line up with libertarianism.
That Mike, that's just because libertarians, in the way that we think, are just idolaters.
Yeah, right.
Well, of course. I mean, duh.
Well, so Carrie, I just have one last question. So the Roe v. Wade was decided by a Republican appointed majority. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that was in the 70s.
Yeah.
But I would just venture to sort of snarkily suggest that this was before they found Jesus in the 80s, right? The Republican Party, they found Jesus or Reagan, or according to them, apparently it's the same. But they found, the right
Man.
way, right? So they became the moral majority, and now, if you don't vote Republican
Sharp
as a
tongue on
Christian,
you,
you're
Doug.
just, I have harsh words.
Yeah.
Jesus had harsh words for Pharisees. Why can't I have harsh
I'm not
words for
discounting.
people?
I'm not discounting.
All right. Just making
I'm just
sure
saying
you're on
now
my
you're
side
calling
here.
yourself Jesus. I don't think that's a wise thing to do.
No, I'm just saying I'm imitating him.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm just gonna go. I'm
Right.
just gonna go at it here. So, my fight is not with you, Matthew.
It's with
Our
me.
our fight is with someone who doesn't understand our movement and continues to perpetuate.
Oh, he makes me.
lies
Here's the
about
thing, though. He makes me sad because there are things about him that I do like and that I can take and appreciate, but then just goes and makes complete categorical and absolute errors. And
and it keeps bringing
it's
it
like,
in.
Al,
Okay,
what the
so
hell are you doing, buddy?
Yeah. So we need. Look, who are we talking about? Al Mohler is
Al
who we're
Mohler.
talking about. The president of the Southern Baptist.
Hey, you guys want to know how to fix abortion real quick first?
Oh yeah.
Yes, please.
Here's the 10th
We're going to
Amendment.
fix the courts.
Here's the 10th Amendment Center strategy on dealing with unconstitutional and overreaching Supreme Court decisions. Ignore them.
Ooh.
Okay.
All right.
I'm serious.
ignore
I'm dead serious.
Yeah, ignore them.
We need to have some states with the wherewithal to pass whatever legislation that they deem appropriate, and then ask the court if the Supreme Court can. I mean, Abraham Lincoln actually made this comment, and Abraham Lincoln's not one of my favorite figures. Sorry, Republicans, but he made the statement. The court's made its opinion. Now let them enforce it. They have no ability to enforce
I love
That's
the most
interesting.
powerful legal argument that you have, Mike, is
Ignore it.
Yeah. It's the Rosa Parks strategy. Just saying.
That's interesting that
I
you
do
say
not
this, Mike.
consent.
Right. It's interesting that you bring that up because, like, the first partial birth abortion ban was at the state level, and it was struck down by Carhart 1. We lost.
I'm here. We're good. We're good.
Okay.
Doug's battery's exhausted.
Yeah.
So
I'm getting
past its
we're
bedtime.
way over time on this episode, by the way.
Yeah.
So when you have a court that strikes down a state law, I mean, I'm assuming you're saying that that's outside their jurisdiction, but that state just, goes and says, oh, well, the Supreme Court said no.
That's basically what happens, and it doesn't have to.
And it
That's
doesn't have to.
why I think we just have an innate authority bias that we all just want to look at somebody who is above us and say, well, I got to talk to them.
Yeah. Well, so Mike, your answer is that we need to empower state governments more.
Mike's answer is
here's the actual thing, and this
was to jab you a little, Matt.
I'm about to offend about probably 2/3 of your audience.
That's all good.
For goodness sake, have the guts of the weed people.
The who?
All right, the weed people,
the marijuana people.
Oh,
I tell the gun rights people this all the time. You guys have no guts compared to the marijuana people. The marijuana people have effectively nullified federal marijuana prohibition. There's 33 states that have legalized marijuana in some way, and yet the federal government still swears up and down that it's illegal across the country.
That is true.
It is true.
Yeah.
It's a terribly persuasive argument.
So you say we'd be better off if we ignored it. All right, we need to wrap this up by taking on Al Mohler because that was like a whole segment, and then we had to.
It was going to be a whole segment.
We got to go back to legal meh. So legal meh and smoking
legal
weed.
meh. Yeah, that should be our catchphrase. Legal meh.
That sounds a lot like you're saying legal meth.
True, but
it's the first thing I thought of, Mike, when he said that.
But we all get together at 4:21, so. Anyway, go ahead, Doug. I'm sorry.
I don't even know where to go.
Al Mohler.
Yes,
Al Mohler.
We were talking about Al Mohler, and we're not trying to pick fights here.
Okay.
We're not?
There's a lot of misunderstandings out there about libertarianism. And from some people who are Christians who seem to have the time and ability to understand what we believe. I mean, it's not like there's a whole website out there dedicated to propagating what exactly libertarian Christians believe.
If only
there were a website that did that, then Al Mohler could read it and say, "Oh, this is what they believe." Well, I disagree, but I shouldn't use this in this argument against them. So the thing of the day isn't like, oh, we're just randomly picking on Al Mohler. It has to do with the abortion content. So
Yeah.
Carrie, this is one of those things where it's like we've talked about this already, sort of like as a stream throughout this entire episode or string of videos here, is that there's this big shiny red button that the Republicans tend to use. And it's like it's the single issue vote thing, right? And so it's like the single most important election of our lifetime because of this one thing.
It's coming at you in November.
And guess what? What happens if that's Matt? I just noticed. I'm looking at the camera. And like, what happens? And it's not the camera that's on. I'm not even looking at the right camera right now. What happens if that's gone?
Yeah.
They take that away. Well,
what do people rally around? Yeah.
What are people going to rally around? The GOP will collapse. It won't get any votes.
That's partially what got George Bush involved, or at least elected in 2000. It was a lot of those single issue voters that was utilized by what's his name that got people out of the woodwork to say,
Karl Rove.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
If you elect Al Jolson, not Al Jolson. What's his name?
Al Gore.
Al Gore.
Why am I so bad on names? It's like 10:30 at night. Anyway, if you
Karl
like
Rove's a tough name to remember 20 years
all
ago.
these single issues aren't going to go your way, so you need to get a Republican in there so that we can get Republican judges and other things so that we can live a better, happier, healthier life. And look at what we've got. So,
yeah.
Well, and this is something that really, when I was researching these court cases and even going back through a lot of Al Mohler stuff, I mean, I gotta say, Al Mohler, and he just recently did a talk at a Ligonier conference just last year where he's talking about these court cases. He's talking about Roe. He's talking about Doe. He's talking about Griswold. He knows. He said he was in the chambers for Casey. So he knows. He knows all of this rationale. Mm-hmm. And yet he's seen
something like your table, just not your table.
Sure. He knows what I know. He knows what I've figured out. And he's sitting here saying, I mean, not only that, like in 2016, he said, I'm not voting for Trump, but now he's saying that Christians, as a manner of stewardship, of the Christian worldview and traditional culture and things like that, we have to vote for Trump. We have to vote for a Republican. We have to get that seat filled by a conservative. And, I went back and I listened to Mohler's debate with Norman Horn from the Julie Roy's show, excuse me.
Yep.
And he said something really interesting, and I wrote it down, and I want to quote it because I feel like we need to hold him to this.
Whoever's editing this, put some long haul reverb on this next phrase.
That's right.
Go ahead.
Got it.
Go ahead.
Okay. He says, I wouldn't want anything to do with holding to a position that is unclear and not absolutely certain that an unborn human being is indeed to be protected, and aggression against an unborn human being is of a matter of grievous moral consequence. He goes on. That to me is exactly where we understand the whole idea of Christian libertarianism breaks down. It's associating itself with a political movement that at the very least is uncertain as to whether an unborn human being is actually a human being that deserves protection and also non-aggression.
So in the 60s, he wouldn't have voted Republican then.
What?
I don't understand this.
But the record...
The record.
The record, right. Al. The record. You're hanging your hat on something that doesn't exist. You want it to exist. It doesn't. And it's unfortunate. I'm sorry to say that the only way that you're going to get rid of this grievous sin in our country is if you start to understand that it is people and it is the individuals who are going to get rid of this, not a government or a court system. Okay, I'm done.
All right. So
I have to say, I find
go ahead, Mike.
I find this whole appeal to the sanctity of life a little thin, considering the Republicans' record of blowing up children in foreign countries.
Yeah.
I'll just throw that out there.
Thank you. Yeah,
No, I think we're on the same page there for sure.
Yeah, we're all on the same page
I figured
there.
we were.
And
I mean, here's the thing. Let's at least be generous and say they don't want that directly, but by their indirect votes and what they call for, that's what ends up happening.
Right.
A lot of conservative Republican friends and my father and family and other people would say that absolutely. But if you're going to on policy when it comes to governmental processes, if you're going to say look at the unintended consequences of bad government policy, you have to say, well, look at the unintended consequences of bad policy on war. Look at what we're doing here. It's terrible. It's terrible.
Well, and here's the other thing, because
and of course I don't want ISIS around. I don't want that. I just don't want. Yeah. Anyway.
All right, Karen, you get the last word.
Qualification.
Okay. I get pegged on by conservatives who don't like that I'm not morally outraged by abortion. Like, Al Mohler is morally outraged on abortion, and rightly so insofar as it's morally outrageous. But that's where these guys stop. They stop with the moral outrage. They just simply say, we want you to be morally outraged by this, and we want you to vote Republican, because for some reason they've persuaded Republicans that that's the way to save the unborn. And, moral outrage, number one, is not a sufficient substitute for justice. And number two, it's the lowest form of thinking. And the only way we are going to solve this abortion problem is to critically think about it and critically think about what the causes are and how to actually resolve it. Our moral outrage is going to do nothing.
Amen.
Wow.
Well, I don't know how
I'm morally outraged.
As Carrie drifts off into the sands of our hourglass, so should we end this episode.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we will we will also have fun next time. And this is like, we might even talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg again, because there's bound to be more stuff that's just going to come up.
It's the most important Supreme Court selection of our lifetime.
Of our lives.
Yeah. Well,
That's
so then by definition, this episode is the most important episode.
The most important
That's right.
episode.
You have to watch it.
Ever.
Boy, I'm glad I'm on this.
Yeah.
Norman missed out, man.
Thanks for joining us, Mike. All right, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks, Mike.